Zahn Callahan always felt peace among the stars, out in the vastness of space. It was just him and the quiet hum of his ship's engines, far from crowded planets and bossy superiors. For over 10 years, the Stargazer had been his home, his only family. But tonight everything changed. Red lights flashed on the control panel, alarms blared, and Zahn's hands moved quickly to try and fix the ship. In front of him, the Veil Nebula stretched out, a beautiful swirl of stars. But something was wrong. His ship's navigation system had gone crazy, and the controls weren't working. "What is happening?" Zahn muttered, hitting the console in frustration. The Stargazer jerked to the left, and he gripped his seat as the ship was pulled by a force he couldn't see. He checked the readings, nothing. No planet, no star anomaly. But something was pulling him off course. Suddenly, the ship went dark, the engine shut off, and the cabin was silent. Zahn's heart raced. He had faced many technical problems in the past, but this was different. It felt like a trap. He tried to restart the systems, running diagnostics, but nothing worked. Alone in the dark cockpit, Zahn took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Then he saw a faint light. It wasn't coming from the control panels. It seemed to be coming from the lower decks, near the cargo hold, glowing softly. Curiosity took over, and he grabbed his plasma pistol, heading cautiously toward the cargo bay. The light grew brighter with each step. When he reached the door, Zahn hesitated. He had transported many things across the galaxy, but nothing that should glow like this. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door. A burst of light flooded the room, and in the center of the cargo bay stood a woman, though she was clearly not human. Her skin had a soft silver glow, and her hair floated as if she were underwater. Her eyes, large and bright, drew Zahn in, making him feel like he was staring into the heart of a star. He froze, lowering his weapon. What are you?" Zahn asked quietly. The woman stepped forward gracefully and said in a soft, melodic voice, "I am Alara, and you are not supposed to be here." Zahn blinked, confused. "What do you mean? This is my ship. I don't even know where here is." Alara's expression softened as she looked around the cargo bay. "We are trapped," she said, "in a part of space that doesn't belong to either of us." Zahn frowned, trying to understand. "Trapped? What's going on?" Alara's eyes flickered with sympathy. "This part of space is different. It doesn't follow the normal rules of the universe. You know it is a place where time and matter bend where lost. Things are drawn and held." Zane shook his head. "That doesn't make any sense. I've been through this sector dozens of times. You have passed close, yes, but something has shifted. You were caught in its pull. And now we are both here in a place that is not meant to be found." Zane stared at her, his mind racing. "Okay, so if we're trapped, how do we get out?" Elle hesitated, her luminous eyes dimming slightly. "I do not know. My powers are limited in this form, and the force that holds us here is ancient." Zane exhaled, rubbing a hand across his face. This was insane. He was a cargo pilot, not some hero in a sci-fi venture, but here he was stuck on a powerless ship with a glowing alien woman who claimed they were trapped in some mysterious part of space. "Great," he muttered. "Just great." Elle moved closer to him, her presence strangely coming despite the chaos of the situation. "Do not despair, Zay Callahan. There's always a way. We must work together if we are to find it." Zane looked at her, surprised that she knew his name, but there was no time to question it. He was stranded, and Yellow was his only hope. He just had to trust her. "For now, all right," he said, nodding. "Let's figure this out." And as they stood there, the dim light of S-form casting strange shadows on the walls, Zane couldn't help but feel that his life had just taken a turn into something far bigger and far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Zane had always been the kind of man who preferred action over introspection. Fix the problem, fly the ship, deliver the cargo. That was his life. But now, standing in the dim glow of ethereal light, he was faced with something entirely different. This wasn't a problem that could be solved with quick thinking or fast reflexes. The Stargazer was dead in the water, if you could even call the void of space water. and his only companion was an alien woman who seemed to know more about the mysteries of the universe than he ever would have moved through the corridors of the ship like she belonged. There her presence calm, serene, and yet undeniably powerful. Her glowing silver skin illuminated the dark halls, and Zan found himself watching her more than he liked to admit. There was something about her, something more than her beauty, that stirred a deep sense of awe in him. She felt ancient, like she carried the weight of eons within her, but also as if she was seeing everything for the first time. As they reached the cockpit, ER stopped, her eyes narrowing slightly as she scanned the darkened control panels. "Your technology is primitive," she said softly, though there was no insult in her tone. "Just observation, but I may be able to assist." Zanin raised an eyebrow. "Primitive, huh? Well, it usually gets the job done. Let's see what you can do." Elle placed her hands on the main console, her fingers moving with deliberate grace over the dark screens. For a moment nothing happened, but then a soft hum filled the air, and Zane's heart leaped in his chest as the ship's lights flickered to life. It wasn't a full reboot, more like a low power mode, but it was something he could see: the faint glow of the emergency systems, the ship's life support systems, and a few basic navigation functions. Zane looked at A, impressed. "Not bad. How did you dash?" "I can manipulate energy," she explained, her voice soft but confident. "In my true form, I am composed of it, but this place, it limits me. I can only access a fraction of my power here." Zane nodded, trying to wrap his head around it. "Energy manipulation, sure, why not? We're stuck in a mystery zone of space. Might as well throw in some superpowers." Earth tilted her head slightly, her lips curving into a small smile. "You are amusing." Zane blinked. "Amusing, yes," Yar said, turning to face him fully. "Your species often approaches the unknown with humor. It is a curious trait." Zane chuckled, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Yeah, well, when the alternative is panicking, you learn to laugh. Keeps you saying." S eyes softened, and for a moment Zane saw something almost human in her expression and understanding that went beyond words. "A wise approach," she said, "but humor alone will not save us." Zane sighed, leaning against the wall of the cockpit. "Right, so any ideas on how to get us out of this mystery zone?" S gaze drifted to the stars outside the viewport. "We are in a quantum anomaly region where the laws of your universe do not fully apply. Time, space, and matter are unstable here. It is why your ship systems are failing. The anomaly distorts everything within it." Zanin frowned. "And you're trapped too. Can't you just don't know, float out of here or something?" "You said you're made of energy." Ella shook her head, her luminous hair swaying gently with the movement. "I am bound to this place, just as you are. In my current form, I am as vulnerable as you. My people are not used to being confined to physical bodies. It weakens us." Zane felt a strange pang of empathy for someone so powerful. Ovi looked fragile now, her glowing form dimming slightly as she spoke. He could only imagine what it must be like for her, someone used to traversing the stars freely, now trapped in a body with limitations just like him. "All right," Zane said, pushing himself off the wall. "We need a plan. If this place distorts reality, then maybe we can figure out how to manipulate it to our advantage. There's got to be something we can use." Ella rolled her eyes, thoughtful. "There is one possibility, but it is dangerous." Zane raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous? This whole situation is dangerous. What are we talking about here?" Elle turned to face him, her expression serious. "The core of the anomaly is a singularity, a tear in the fabric of space and time. It is what holds us here. If we can reach it, I might be able to use my energy to break through its field and create a way out. But getting close to the singularity is dangerous." "A singularity?" Zane repeated, thinking about the word. "Like a black hole." "Similar," Elara said, "but not exactly. This one doesn't swallow things. It distorts them. If we stay too long, it could tear your ship apart or worse." Zane sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Sounds like fun, but if it's the only way out, we don't have much choice, do we?" Elara looked into his eyes, and they both understood. Like it or not, they were in this together. In this strange and hostile part of space, They were each other's only hope. Very well, Ilara said softly but firmly. I'll guide you to the singularity. But you must know, Zane, the closer we get, the more it will mess with your mind. You might see things, experience strange visions. You'll have to trust me to get us through. Zane swallowed nervously. Visions? That's not exactly comforting. Ilara smiled slightly. You've faced danger before, haven't you? Zane smirked, trying to ease the tension. Yeah, but most of them didn't involve my brain getting scrambled by a space anomaly. Her expression softened. I'll protect you as much as I can, but you must stay strong. The force behind this anomaly feeds on weakness and fear. Zane stood up straighter, feeling the weight of the situation settle on him. Heavier than any gravity. He hadn't signed up for this. He was just a cargo pilot trying to make a living, but now the stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined in the survival of both him and rested on his ability to stay calm, to think clearly, and to trust in something far beyond his understanding. He glanced at her glowing form, radiating calm amidst the chaos. She seemed to carry an aura of certainty that was almost infectious, and, for the first time since this ordeal began, Zane felt a glimmer of hope. All right, he said, his voice steady. Let's go. Find this singularity. Ella inclined her head, a silent acknowledgement of their shared resolve. She stepped toward the cockpit's control panel, her hands hovering over the navigation controls. Zane watched as a map of the region flickered to life, showing a distorted representation of space around them. At the center of the screen was a swirling vortex and ominous shifting mass that pulsed with dark energy. That's it, Jose said, eyeing the singularity with a mixture of awe and dread. Yes, I replied. The closer we get, the more the distortion will intensify. We must be cautious. Zane nodded, taking his seat in the pilot's chair and gripping the controls. Cautious, got it, as he set a course toward the singularity. Zane couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into something far beyond their control, but there was no turning back. Now the only way out was through. Era stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on the back of his chair, a comforting presence in the uncertainty ahead. Together they would face the unknown, bound by fate and circumstance, and by something deeper, something that transcended the boundaries of space and time. And as the stargazer moved forward, drawn inexorably toward the heart of the anomaly, Zane realized that this strange, beautiful alien woman might be the key, not only to their survival, but to something far greater than he had ever imagined. There were no longer just passengers on a broken ship. They were explorers on the edge of reality itself. The stargazer moved slowly through the strange, warped, expansive space, its systems barely functional as it was dragged toward the singularity. The cockpit windows were filled with a swirling kaleidoscope of colors, blues, purples, and green, shifting and blending like a living, breathing nebula. Space itself seemed to ripple and twist, distorting the stars and bending light in ways that Zane had never seen before. It was mesmerizing and terrifying. At the same time, Zane's knuckles were white as he gripped the controls, doing everything he could to keep the ship steady. The further they went, the more he could feel the anomaly's effects. His head throbbed with a dull ache, and his vision occasionally blurred, as if reality itself was flickering between states of being. Zane couldn't shake the feeling that he was trapped in a dream or a nightmare where nothing made sense. Ilara stood beside him, her form shimmering faintly, a calm presence in the middle of the chaos. Her eyes were closed as she focused on sensing the energy of the anomaly. Every now and then, she whispered directions, guiding Zane around dangerous areas of distorted space that could tear the ship apart. But as they got closer to the singularity, the atmosphere became heavier. Zane could feel it in his bones, like a weight pressing down on him, growing worse with each moment. The ship's hum was low and ominous, and the walls of the stargazer groaned as if they were under pressure from some invisible force. How much further? Zane asked, his voice tense as he tried to stay focused. Ilara opened her eyes and glanced at the navigation display, which only showed swirling energy. We're close, very close. The singularity is just beyond the next distortion field. Zane nodded, swallowing his anxiety. He noticed that Alara's glow had faded a little, and her movements were slower and more deliberate. The anomaly was affecting her too. As they moved forward, the ship shuddered violently, throwing Zane against the control panel. He gritted his teeth, pulling himself back into his seat. The lights flickered, and for a moment, everything went dark. Then, a voice echoed through the ship. "Intruders in my domain." It was deep and guttural, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Zane froze, his heart pounding. The voice wasn't human or even alien like any he had encountered before. It felt ancient, vast, like it had existed long before the universe itself. He glanced at Alara, who had gone still, her eyes wide with alarm. "What was that?" Zane whispered, his mouth dry. Alara's face was pale, her once glowing skin now dimming further. "The entity," she said softly, her voice barely above a breath. "The being that controls this anomaly, it has noticed us." Zane's stomach turned. "What do you mean noticed us? Can it attack?" Ella noted her expression grim. "It feeds on the energy of those who enter its domain. It is drawn to life force, fear, chaos, pain. We must not let it consume us." The ship shooted again, and the voice echoed through the halls once more, louder this time, like the creaking of a massive ancient creature. "You will not leave." Zane's pulse quickened. He gripped the controls, trying to push the ship forward, but the stargazers seemed to be moving slower and slower, as if the air around it had turned to molasses. Elara said urgently, her voice breaking through the growing panic. "Listen to me. The entity is warping the space around us. If we do not act quickly, it will trap us here forever. I can shield us, but I need your help." Zane blinked, his mind racing. "What do you need me to do?" Ella turned toward him, her silver eyes locking onto his. "I need to draw power from the ship. If I can access enough energy, I can create a barrier to protect us from the entity's influence, but it will take everything. The starter has left." Zane hesitated. "Everything? You mean we'd be dead in the water? No power, no engines, no life support?" Elle nodded. "Yes, but if we do nothing, the entity will crush us before we ever reach the singularity." Zane's mind reeled. If they used up all the ship's power, there was no guarantee they'd be able to restart it. They'd be floating in the void, completely helpless. But if they didn't act, the entity would tear them apart before they even got close to escaping. "Damn it," Zane muttered, running a hand through his hair. "All right, do it. Take what you need." Yellow wasted no time. She placed her hands on the control panel, her fingers glowing brighter as she began to draw the ship's energy into herself. The lights flickered once, twice, and then dimmed, leaving only a faint emergency glow in the cockpit. The ship groaned, and for a moment everything went still. Zane held his breath, watching Elle closely as her body absorbed the energy. Her form began to glow bright, her silver skin shimmering with renewed intensity. The air around her seemed to hum with power, but then the entity struck. The walls of the ship buckled, metal creaking under the pressure of some unseen force. The voice thundered through the halls, filled with anger and malice. "You will be mine." Dark tendrils of energy began to see through the walls, twisting and coiling like living shadows. Zane's heart pounded as he grabbed his plasma pistol, firing at the tendrils as they slithered toward them. The shots hit their mark, but the tendrils seemed to absorb the energy, growing larger and more menacing with each pulse of the singularity's power. Zay shouted, backing toward her as the tendrils closed. "And we've got company." S eyes flashed open, now burning with light. She raised her hands, and a wave of energy surged from her, forming a glowing barrier around them. The tendril slammed into it, recoiling with a hiss as the energy burned them away, but more kept coming, a relentless tide of darkness, seeking to consume them. "I cannot hold this for long," Yellow warned, her voice strained with the effort of maintaining the shield. Zane gritted his teeth, firing at the tendrils that managed to slip through the cracks in the barrier. The air around them was thick with tension, the entity's presence growing stronger with every passing second. "We need to move." Elara shouted her voice filled with urgency. I have gathered enough energy. We must reach the singularity now. Zane didn't need to be told twice. He dove for the controls, steering the ship toward the singularity. Swirling vortex, the stargazer groaned under the strain, its engine sputtering as the last reserves of power were drained. To maintain their course, the entity roared, its voice filling Zane's mind with an overwhelming sense of dread. The tendrils lashed out, striking the barrier again and again, each hit weakening as shield. We're almost there, Zane shouted, his eyes locked on the singularity ahead. It loomed large, a massive swirling void of energy that seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. The tendrils closed in, coiling around the ship's hull, squeezing tighter with every second, and then, with a final surge of energy, it let out a cry, and the ship was thrust forward, straight into the heart of the singularity. For a moment, everything went dark. The sound of the entity's voice faded into nothingness, and the oppressive weight that had pressed down on them vanished. Zane blinked, his vision clearing as the cockpit lights flickered back to life. The tendrils were gone. The ship was silent, floating in the stillness of space. They had made it. Zay slumped back in his chair, his heart racing as he looked at Elle. She was breathing heavily, her form dimmed once more, but she was alive. We did it, Zane said, his voice filled with disbelief. Elle nodded weakly, her eyes meeting his. Yes, but we are not free yet. The anomaly, it still holds us, but we have bought ourselves time. Zane exhaled slowly, the adrenaline still pumping through his veins. They had escaped the entity, but the singularity was still ahead of them, and their journey was far from over. We've come this far, Zane said, his voice steady. We're getting out of this together. Elle smiled faintly, the light in her eyes flickering with hope. And for the first time, Zane felt that hope too. They weren't just survivors, they were fighters, and the fight was far from over. The stargazer drifted in the quiet of space, its engine silent after the battle with the entity. Zane sat slumped in his chair, breathing heavily as the weight of the last few hours finally began to settle over him. His hands trembled as he let go of the controls, exhaustion washing over him like a wave. He had faced plenty of close calls during his time as a cargo pilot, but this was on a whole new level. The darkness of space beyond the cockpit was tranquil, almost peaceful, but it carried the eerie reminder of just how close they had come to being consumed by the singularity. Next to him, Ao was quiet, her glow dim and soft as she sat with her eyes closed, recovering from the tremendous energy she had expended. Her once radiant silver skin now appeared almost translucent, like the last light of a dying star. Zane could see how much the ordeal had drained her, and the thought of how hard she had fought to save them sent a pang of gratitude through his chest. We made it, Zane said softly, his voice sounding distant in the silence of the cockpit. We're still alive. Elle opened her eyes slowly, the silver irises flickering like embers. She gave a small nod, her voice faint but steady. Yes, but the journey is not over. Zane raised an eyebrow, exhaustion lacing his features. You mean we're not out of the woods yet? Ella shook her head. The singularity is behind us, but we are still within the anomaly. The distortion field remains, and though the entity no longer pursues us, we are not free. The anomaly will pull us back if we do not find an escape route. Zane sighed, rubbing his temples. Of course, it's never that easy, is it? He glanced at the navigation screen, which was still glitching, showing flickers of distorted data. They had escaped the entity's grip, but they were still stuck in this bizarre, twisted region of space with no clear path out. The singularity had been their greatest threat, but the anomaly itself was still an unknown force, one that could tear them apart if they weren't careful. Shifted in her seat, her form slowly beginning to regain some of its brightness. There is hope, she said, her voice gaining a bit of strength now that the entity has been defeated. The anomaly's energy is more steady. I can sense currents of space-time that lead to other parts of the universe. If we can harness them, we can ride those currents to safety. Zane frowned, leaning forward in his seat. Ride the currents of space-time sounds like something out of a science fiction. Hollowed a small smile tugged at the corner of S lips in many ways your science fiction is closer to reality than you know. Zane chuckled, shaking his head. I don't think I'll ever get used to this, but if you say we can do it, then I trust you. S gaze softened and she reached out, placing a glowing hand on his arm. You have shown great courage, and more than you realize. You have faced the unknown without losing hope. That is a rare gift. Zane felt a warmth spread through him at her touch, a sense of comfort and connection that went beyond words. For a moment he simply looked at her, his thoughts swirling. He had been so focused on survival, on the immediate danger, that he hadn't had time to process everything that had happened. He was just a pilot, an ordinary man caught up in an extraordinary situation, but in the middle of it all, had become more than just a companion. She had become his anchor, his guide through the chaos. Thanks, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what I would have done without you. S eyes shimmered, her smile soft but filled with a quiet intensity. We saved each other. Zane nodded, the words sinking deep into his heart. He had never been one for cosmic destinies or grand adventures, but somehow it felt like meeting Ella. Getting trapped in this anomaly had all been part of something greater than either of them, and now for the first time he felt that whatever was waiting for them beyond this strange region of space, they would face it together. Era stood, the soft glow around her beginning to brighten as she moved to the ship's central console. I will guide us to the currents of space-time. They are invisible to your ship sensors, but I can sense them follow my directions closely. Zane rose from his seat, his exhaustion giving way to a renewed sense of purpose. Got it, let's do this. As Elam manipulated the ship's navigation systems, Zane felt a strange calm settle over him. The cockpit hummed softly, the only sound in the quiet expanse of space. The tension that had gripped him for hours finally began to ease, and for the first time since they had been pulled into the anomaly, Zane felt a sliver of hope that they might actually make it out of this alive. Course plotted, Era said, her voice strong and steady. Prepare for a turbulent ride. The currents are unpredictable, but once we are within them, they will carry us beyond the anomalies' influence. Zane nodded, taking his place at the controls. I've handled turbulence before. Bring it on. The ship shuddered as Ella activated the engines, a low hum filling the air as they powered up. The stargazers slowly began to move, navigating through the swirling distortion field with S guidance. The cockpit windows showed nothing but an endless expanse of warped space. Faced the stars beyond, stretched and distorted like light through a prism. But Zane trusted Ella. She had gotten him this far. As they neared the edge of the anomaly, the ship lurched violently, and Zane gripped the controls tightly, his heart racing. The currents of spacetime were invisible, but he could feel their pulling, almost gravitational force that tugged at the ship, threatening to send them spiraling into the void. Hold steady, Elle called, her voice clear and commanding. We are entering the current. The ship bucked again, and Zane gritted his teeth, fighting to keep the stargazer on course. The stars outside the windows blurred into streaks of light, and the air inside the cockpit seemed to vibrate with otherworldly hum. For a moment it felt like the ship was being torn in two, stretched between two dimensions. Then with a sudden jolt they broke free. The ship surged forward, propelled by an unseen force, and the distortion field around them vanished. The stars outside the windows returned to their normal shape, twinkling softly against the backdrop of space. The anomaly was behind them, left far in the distance. Zane let out a breath. He hadn't realized they had made it. They were free. Zane glanced at Alara, who stood beside him, her eyes on the stars ahead. Her glow had returned, bright and strong now that they were out of the anomaly's reach. We're out, Zane said, his voice full of relief. Alara nodded, her gaze softening. Yes, we're safe now. Zane leaned back in his chair, a tired but happy smile on his face. So where do we go from here? Alara turned to him, her silver eyes warm, making Zane's heart skip a beat. Wherever the stars take us together. Zane chuckled, feeling the weight of their journey lift like a comforting blanket. He had never thought his life would change so much. Trapped in an unknown part of space with an alien woman who defied everything he thought he knew about the universe. But as he looked at Alara, he realized this was the start of something new, something he didn't even know he was looking for. He reached out, taking her hand. Her soft, glowing skin felt warm in his grip. Yeah, together. The stargazer drifted through the calm space, its path set not by a destination, but by endless possibilities. Zane and Alara had faced the unknown and come out stronger. They were no longer lost. They had found each other and, with that, a new path forward. As the ship moved ahead, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter, as if welcoming them to the next chapter of their journey. Two souls bound by the stars and the vastness of the cosmos.